Okay, it's 12:01, so we'll call the meeting to order, the 13th meeting of the Corporate Services Committee. This is a virtual meeting as we are still in a phase of the COVID-19 emergency. So please check the city website for current details of COVID-19 service impacts, and all meetings can be viewed via live streaming on YouTube and the city website. I will tell you that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing, or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact csc@london.ca. Now I will look to committee members to see if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, I will go to the consent items. We have 6. Would anybody like to pull any of those items? Great, no pulling. Therefore, I need a motion for the consent items, moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. And comments, questions? Deputy Mayor Morgan, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I wanted to make a couple of comments on the items under the consent agenda that have been moved. The first is the optional small business subclass option that staff have put together. First, I want to thank our staff for putting together a very comprehensive report that outlines some of the challenges we would face by implementing such a subclass. And I agree with just receiving the information at this time. Frankly, there is no secret pot of money to support small businesses with, and all we would end up doing is shifting the tax burden from one group of taxpayers to another, and I'm not supportive of that at this time. I also think it's a change that is very difficult to roll back on if it ends up being not the right decision. So as other communities investigate and proceed with this, I certainly think we have time to think about it in the future, but at this time I'm supportive of what staff have recommended, and that's just receiving the information, and I appreciate the analysis that they provided. It's very helpful. The other thing I would comment on is, and actually it's a question for our staff. There was a piece of late correspondence from Mr. Butler on the added agenda about the necessity of public participation meetings for the council policy manual review. And I wonder if the clerk could comment on whether or not that is the case. I just want his letter to be commented on so that it's very clear what our obligations are in this space.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll go to the clerk.
Thank you. Through the chair, on behalf of the city clerk, the intention of the revision is to allow for some flexibility where that's necessary. You'll recall that we've had to amend the procedure bylaw a few times throughout the past 18 months, the majority of which has very little impact on the public and the public's ability to attend or participate in the meetings in terms of what's outlined in the procedural bylaw. So it's just an attempt to be a little bit more flexible in that regard, but the prerogative to still require a public participation meeting where the clerk warrants that to be required would still, of course, be able to be utilized.
Deputy Mayor?
No, that was what I was looking for on that item, was for our clerks to comment. I'll let other colleagues comment on the consent items now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My comments today are just in regards to the corporate asset management plan. A really full review and a touch point of where we're at and what the growing infrastructure gap is, and certainly lots of considerations due to COVID and some things that we're not even going to see fully realize the cost of. My question in particular today is in regards to page 18 regarding London's long-term cares, in regards to being cost efficient. Is at risk of not meeting facilities reinvestment rate with a slight decrease, as well as insufficient capital funding for equipment assets as recommended by the corporate asset management plan. Just looking for staff comment of making sure everyone there still has what they need, and it's just a potential heads up of what might come down the road, recognizing Dearness Home has done very well during the COVID-19 pandemic, and staff have been working very hard, just making sure that everything's still in place there.
Is Mr. Dickens on the line to respond to that?
Thank you, Chair. I am on the line. So through you, yes, we are working with our corporate asset management team here to ensure that we do in fact maintain a good standing and meeting our targets in that regard. We still have further conversations to have as this process unfolds, but if any of my colleagues in finance want to chime in as well, then I'd offer the floor to them.
Any further comment from staff?
Yeah, thank you. It's Ms. Barbone. I just wanted to say that this really is with respect to our levels of service conversation and is really just at the beginning part of this process to incorporate it into our asset management. So in addition to what Mr. Dickens has offered, is our team is working with them and looking at the metrics that we have started to investigate and are working through. So we're at the very initial stages and have lots more work to do, but it's really starting to go towards the conversation that we will have in the next very fulsome update, that council will be able to start to look at what those hours of service are and how that starts to impact the cost to support those services as we look at asset management in the future.
Thank you, Ms. Barbone. Councillor?
Madam Chair, one follow-up question would be for Mr. Dickens as well. Recognizing there were certain provincial restrictions put on us during COVID, and as we reemerge, if you could just say briefly what's happening with the Homemakers program and the Adult Day program at Dearness as we transition.
Mr. Dickens?
Thank you, and through the chair, the Adult Day program, we have been trying to find creative ways of still providing some of that programming. We have been in conversations with our ministry representatives around the resumption of the ADP program. We expect it to come back online this fall. We've seen significant changes in a very short period of time recently around the easing of restrictions, around the group gathering limits, and the ability to resume these types of programs. So we will continue to move towards a fall relaunch of the ADP program as we used to know it. But like I mentioned, we have been trying to be creative in offering programming throughout the pandemic, working closely with individuals and their families, as well as with the ministry. The same for the Homemakers program. We do have service under contract, and we are working with service providers to ensure that individuals registered in that program still continue to receive in-home care. That has not been drastically impacted. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Madam Chair, and to Mr. Dickens. Is certainly support for families has not stopped that they would request and need. And just following up on the Deputy Mayor's comments in regards to item 2.1 being the small business subclass summary. A great report, lots of potential options, obviously very new from the province, allowing us potentially what to do. And definitely considerations about what a property tax shift would mean of a reduction of service or somebody else picking up the variance. And I did find it interesting, the province did say we could go up to 35% if we chose, even though it was a 5 to 8% savings back in the day before they eliminated the prior program to this. So great information, and looking forward to seeing what other places do and how it works. But at this point, not interested personally in moving forward with implementing anything at this moment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll go to the Mayor and then to Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Chair. If 2.1 is still on the table for discussion.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate the fact that the province has given us this kind of latitude. It was announced in the budget when they lowered and equalized the business education tax right across the province. This was one of the options that was given. What I get a little, and that kind of equity, I think we certainly all supported, and it made sense. The province took a significant financial, made a significant financial investment to do this. This, if I read it correctly, and I just want to be sure as I speak to and ask a question, Ms. Barbone, through you, I just want to be super clear, or Mr. Murray, that to be able to affect a lower tax rate for whatever way we identify small business, does that mean in terms of trying to neutralize revenue, we would have to increase it on another component of business? Can you just or she confirm that for me, please?
Ms. Barbone?
Thank you, through the chair. So the mayor is absolutely correct. In order to, the intent of the legislation is that you could allow that discount to a new class, but that would then be shifted to all classes or to the rest of the commercial class. So it's definitely a tax shift to be able to achieve the objective based on the subclass being added.
So through you, Chair, what I'm trying to understand, thank you, Ms. Barbone, I'm trying to understand the logic of this then. I think we've tried really hard to be mindful of picking winners and losers, and we know the struggle small businesses had. But why do we want to increase additional staff time to review it later versus just killing it now? And I say that because I'm not particularly excited about studying to study, to come back and say what we already know, which means we're going to put a heavier tax burden on another tax class of business. I don't think it's fair. It doesn't strike me as right. So can I ask through you to Ms. Barbone, what's the implication of just saying take no action?
Well,
So
sorry, Ms. Barbone, I'll just say the motion on the floor right now is to receive this report, but I'll go to Ms. Barbone for further discussion.
thank you, through the chair. So certainly there are a number of options here for council to consider should you wish to look at this further. We've left the report fairly open-ended because this is very, very new, and we've done a great deal of work, and Mr. McMillan and Mr. Logan and Mr. Collins have been putting a great deal of research into all of the things that we know so that we could bring a fulsome report to council. So certainly, you know, it depends on what council is ultimately trying to achieve. If at the end of the day, that council does not have a wish to simply just shift the tax burden to support a group, then this is not something that I would recommend we put any effort further into. Certainly, if council's not really sure and wants to have some more consultation to talk to the public and to see if there is perhaps maybe some appetite from the commercial sector to actually pursue this. You know, there's winners and losers, unfortunately, because you are shifting it. You're not going to have the equal impact across all. So I think what we tried to do was to have this a fulsome, that if council really wasn't sure and wanted to have us look more into this, that was open to you and that you had the resolution ready to go if you'd like us to look at this more fulsomely. We're at the very initial starts. Other municipalities are just starting to look at this. So in order to actually affect this, if council wished to pursue it for 2022, we would need to move quickly to get it onto the roll. Otherwise, you'd be looking at 2023, which we'd have significantly more time to investigate.
So Chair, through you, I'm just sorry that staff have put any time into this. I feel quite strongly that as much as I am and we on council support small business, whatever way we define that, to do that at expense of other classes of business for tax purposes is wrong. So the fact you put some work into it, thank you. So we can get to this point, I suppose, Ms. Barbone. But just so that we don't spend any more time, and I have not spoken to other colleagues around this table, but I'd like to amend the motions on the table to receive and take no action. I don't know if I've got a seconder on that, but that's my perspective on it, because at some point we have to make a statement and say, you know, better use of staff time on other things of substance.
Okay, and I see your second there, Councillor Van Hulst. I know that the deputy mayor had moved receive. Do you feel strongly about moving this, your worship, or do you want to offer it as a friendly amendment to the mover?
Oh, I'll be super friendly with the deputy mayor. Happy to do that if the deputy mayor is of similar mind.
Deputy mayor?
Yes, I think that aligns with my comments. I don't have an interest in pursuing this at all at this time. by taking a more definitive action on this. I think it's clear for the next 12 months. So I'm happy to accept that into the consent motion that I moved.
Wonderful, great. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Anything? Okay, just conferring with the clerk. So it's still, so the motion is part of consent, and the motion is receive and take no action. It will be voted on with all of the rest of the consent items. Unless somebody feels very strongly about voting on this separately, the motion is as the mayor and the deputy mayor have agreed. And so it works fine to do it all with consent, and I will only pull it out separately if somebody feels very strongly about having a separate vote on this. Mr. Mayor, you still have the floor.
No, I appreciate the deputy mayor's accommodation, Councillor Van Hulst's broad support. I'm quite content with this being on the consent agenda as amended. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I'll go to you, Councillor Van Hulst now.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the mayor as well. This was an item that I had considered pulling and asking that we take no action on, so this has gone the way I initially intended. Receiving it would have been fine, and I think had a similar but not as definitive result. So thank you for that. And when I first read through it, what went through my mind is a couple of seniors on fixed income going into a coffee shop and saying, well, you know how I used to come in for a coffee every day. Well, I can't do that because my taxes went up, and in order to lower your property taxes. And so again, that shift from where we might be essentially taking money from the customers of businesses doesn't seem great. I think there's other ways that we can help small businesses. We could, for instance, provide some funds to the BIAs to create a business directory. So those kinds of things are possible. This one, as has been already said, doesn't seem to have a great deal of promise, and certainly would be a lot of work, and an additional level of bureaucracy as well, which would eat up some of those funds that would otherwise go to the businesses. So my thanks again about the corporate asset management plan. That's a lot of work, but it's great to see, and I think it's really encouraging that our there seems to be very little deterioration showing up, and we have a growing amount of assets that are good and very good. So I wanted to get, just for the perhaps the people at home, a clarification about the infrastructure gap. So when we take on, assume a new subdivision with a number of roads, every time we do that, our infrastructure gap goes up immediately. Isn't that correct? Even though those are in perfect condition as they are, we still have a growing infrastructure gap. Through you, maybe I could ask staff to confirm that.
Okay, I'll look for a response from staff.
If I can answer, I'm Khalid Shahata, Manager of Corporate Asset Management, through the chair. So typically the infrastructure gap that we present is for existing assets. When we add new subdivision, we treat it as additional growth asset, and we have a different avenue to address the infrastructure gap for those additional assets. So the numbers that we have presenting as a city growing infrastructure gap is for existing infrastructure that we want to maintain the current level of service that we are providing to the community. For new infrastructure, we have been proactive in that, where we are submitting an assessment gross business case. We are putting aside enough money to address those new infrastructure. We may not be there at sustainability yet, but we have a plan try to achieve sustainability over the upcoming years. When we add those gross infrastructure and see whether we are having an infrastructure gap for growth asset or not, we may, but we haven't quantified that as we speak yet.
Thank you, Mr. Shahata. Councillor Van Hulst, anything further?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the answer. And I think that's very encouraging that we're looking at that in a proactive way. So thank you very much. My next question about the infrastructure gap are those items that are in very poor condition. So we're evaluating these, I guess, on a continual basis. And how nimble are we in deciding which of those assets we're going to repair?
Mr. Shahata.
Through the chair. So right now we are doing a detailed analysis for the core infrastructure and the 7 service area that we presented with detailed condition analysis for them. So we're looking in our database and trying our best to understand what's the current minimum acceptable level of service and addressing the needs for those assets. We have some assets in poor and very poor. We can't replace all of them at the same time due to few constraints, but we are trying. When you see the gap, the difference between what we should be spending versus what the city is spending, it's growing, and we understand it's growing, but it's growing at a lower rate than what we anticipate in 2019. So that's a good news. We are continuously enhancing the accuracy of our data, and we are embarking on many initiatives to understand more the condition of our wastewater treatment plant, for example, our stormwater assets. So we are doing our best to improve, but it takes time to achieve where we are comfortable with the accuracy of the information and reach the point where we can take decision based on the accurate information that we have.
Thank you. Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, thank you for all that work. I have a question about the 2020 investment report. So there's been some changes in our strategy, and I wonder if our city treasurer would comment on a couple of those. I think that would be interesting for people to hear.
Ms. Barbon?
Thank you, through the chair. So essentially what we're trying to do is to really look at what the objective is of our investment policy, and more clearly define that is to ensure that ultimately our investments are keeping up with the purchasing power that those investments are intended to do. So we are shifting away, particularly one of the learnings we saw over the last year with interest rates falling to an all-time low, is the ability to earn almost a higher equivalent level of earnings on having some cash in our high interest savings account, as opposed to investing those funds into shorter term investments such as GICs that were actually returning a lower rate. So the intent is to really start to look at what we're investing in and really starting to shift that over time to invest a little bit more in equities, still very much clearly at a level of 15% up to, that would be the maximum, which is a little bit more in line with other municipalities, and also very much in line with looking at the prescribed list and trying to ensure that the investments we're choosing within the prescribed list are to the city's interest to in turn return a higher level of interest over, or revenue, I should say, over the period of time that we hold the investments. So in our reserve funds, we hold generally a longer term to maturity because those investments tend to support our capital assets, as an example, which have a longer term investment. So really what we're trying to do is to look at overall how much cash we have that is available at hand so that we can start to invest more wisely with variability in terms that will create the greatest return to the city.
Councillor?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
Okay, I'll go to the Deputy Mayor now.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I apologize for not weighing in on this in my earlier comments. I was happy to hear the comments from Budget Chair Pelosa on the infrastructure gap, but I did want to add some context based on the discussion we've had. I think the key piece of the infrastructure gap, as we contemplated, is figure 2, which shows the way the gap has changed over time. And our staff, rightly so, has said we're tracking below what we anticipated in 2019. But for those of us who served on the previous council and have gone through 2 multi-year budgets, council and staff have taken some decisive action in addressing the infrastructure gap. And you can see we are well below where we were tracking in 2014 by well over $150 million. This does not happen by surprise. This was slow, steady, and thoughtful investments in addressing the infrastructure gap in the multi-year budget, as well as amending things like our surplus policy to ensure a portion of those surpluses go in towards addressing the gap. And so you don't make $150 million of gains over a short period of time, just out of the blue. It is a thoughtful respect for our fiscal policies and plans and prudent decision-making on the part of council and staff. The other thing that factors into this, of course, is service levels. And the treasurer had mentioned this in her comments. You know, the infrastructure gap is about service provision. And when you look at roads and transportation, it's not only the cost of us meeting our service levels, but any changes we make to service levels. So if we were to change the pavement quality index levels at which we target renewing roadways, either up or down, that would have a change to the infrastructure gap because we would have either more or less roadways that are meeting that service standard. So the infrastructure gap can fluctuate over time by both changes in costs as well as changes in service levels and decisions of council. And it can also be tackled through the smart, prudent planning and socking money away to address it. Ideally in the long run, you would get to a point where you would have a stable horizontal line where there is a reasonable level of gap because you can't build everything and fix everything every year. And we've certainly closed that over time, but there's still obviously more work to be done, but this is done over a long time horizon. And so I appreciate the report. I think it sets us up well. I know we'll be doing a much more detailed update in 2022 in advance of the next multi-year budget. But this is an excellent interim update to know where we stand and the types of adjustments that have been made to the numbers based on emerging conditions. So thanks for that. I just wanted to add a bit of that context for the discussion.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any further discussion? So I just want to add my support for the motion on the small business subclass report. I want to thank staff for that report. I understand the mayor's comments about not investing too much effort into this, but I think when the province comes forward with proposals or initiatives, it's incumbent upon us to look at the feasibility for us here locally. We certainly wouldn't want anybody in the small business community to think that we weren't exploring all avenues and options that could make things easier for them. And having just come out of COVID, these kinds of things are definitely worth talking about. I do agree that the property tax system is not the best system to take these kinds of initiatives. It's very well laid out in the report. In many, many, many cases, the business owners are not the actual property owners. And so there are a lot of details in the report on how things would have to be manipulated and twisted and adjusted in order to achieve the ends that are being sought. So I agree that the education portion of the property tax change that the province made recently was very welcome. That was an excellent thing to do, and I'm grateful to the province on behalf of our business community for making that change and making that all more equitable here in London and in other communities as well. So again, I'm supportive of the direction that we are taking here at committee. And those are my comments. And if there are no further questions, oh, there's the mayor. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much, Chair. What hasn't gotten a lot of attention, I think, is the council policy manual review. Tremendous amount of effort has gone into this. I want to thank staff for doing that. I've gone through it. And I really do appreciate the kind of work that has resulted in the several hundred pages, couple hundred pages of documentation on this. It's so important we get this that the rules are clear, and I think particularly in areas around the Integrity Commissioner and Code of Conduct, I think that was particularly helpful. So I just want to thank staff through you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Excellent points. And with that, Mr. Mayor gets the last word, and I will call the question.
I vote in favor, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Councillor.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 6-0.
Thank you. The items for direction, and we have a decision to make regarding filling the vacancy on the London Hydro Board. I'm going to go to the council rep on that board. Councillor Van Hulst, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's delightful to see how many extremely well qualified candidates have put their names forward. And we have in the past interviewed, and I think that was the motion that we had at our last committee meeting, which was the annual general meeting for London Hydro. So I'm suggesting that we choose 3 or 4, perhaps 4 individuals that our committee can interview and then provide a recommendation to the SPPC 4. So I believe we have a process where councillors could choose up to 4 applicants, and then the clerks could tell us which ones received the most votes, and we could take the top 4. That would be my suggestion.
Okay, I'm going to go to the clerk to see what she thinks about that.
Thank you. Through the chair, I think that's a great idea. I do have all of the names set up in a selection process, should that be how the committee wants to proceed.
Thank you. I think we can certainly put everybody's name on that ballot, and so I'm happy to proceed in that way.
So if we put all the names up, then everybody would be able to select 3 or 4. We need to decide how many we want to put forward to go through the interview process. The councillor is suggesting 4. I'm open to any comments or debate or discussion on this from other committee members. Mr. Mayor, you put your hand in the air. Was that because you wanted to speak?
Often that's why. Thank you, Chair. And in this case, you're absolutely right. I don't think it's overly material, 3 or 4. I mean, if the idea is that we interview the top 3, I'm fine. If we interview the top 4, fine. But the fact that, so if part of Councillor Van Hulst's motion is to just put everybody on the floor and then we take the top 3 or 4, I'm fine with that. But here's my question of you, Chair, and I really want some clarity from the clerk on this in a moment.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, that last sentence I just missed.
Yeah, well, and the reason I paused is because what I was looking for is clarity from the clerk, and I know that you and she were locked in learned counsel together. So what I'm trying to understand is this: if we do top 3 or 4, if you'll recall, we had an issue in our last council meeting relating to our LMCH appointments. And we split a single motion on the basis that one of our council colleagues suggested that you had to vote for 3 or you had to vote for 4. I'd like to get absolute clarity from the clerk, please. If it's 3 or if it's 4, are we voting as you had advised us in the last time, up to a certain number, but not necessarily more than 1? Presuming that we can't abstain, can we vote for 1, 2, 3, whatever the max number is, or something less than that?
Thank you. Through the chair, this is a selection process to establish who the committee would like to interview. It is removed from the approved policy for an appointment process. So when I had asked the chair for some clarity about how many, that's just so that we know how many we're going to bring forward for the interviews. I'm in the committee's hands whether you want the selection process to allow you to vote for up to 4 or up to 3. With respect to the policy itself, which again is not applicable in this specific circumstance, the policy is permissive to allow the members to vote for up to the amount.
So Chair, through you, does it require us to put a motion forward that we can, as for this purpose of this interview process, vote up to? And if that requires a motion, I'm comfortable with that. I don't want to tie councillors' hands into voting for a name just to have an extra name on the ballot. If they feel strongly about 1 or 2 or 3 to be interviewed instead of 4, or 1 and 2 instead of 3.
So, Mr. Mayor, somebody could make a motion to require that everybody vote for a certain number of people. Somebody could make that motion, but it is not required. If there is no motion that says that, then people can vote for one person to be on the list, or 17, maybe not 17, but.
17's a lot. So why don't I, just to get this kicked off, why don't I say that in support of Councillor Van Holst, and either seconding his or making my own as you prefer, that we move a motion that we select 3 candidates today. I'm just saying 3, and I'm not going to die on that if the councillor is very strong about that. 3 candidates to be interviewed by committee, and that members of committee and council can vote for up to 3 individuals for consideration. Something.
Okay, so the mayor's moving that. The Councillor Van Holst is seconding that. And next I will, if the mayor's finished with his comments, then I will go to Councillor Pelosa and then, Councillor Deputy Mayor Morgan, and then Councillor Pelosa, and then Councillor Van Holst. So go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I think the point here is to get to a consolidated list of interviews. I'm prepared to pick 3 people for interviews. So I think this motion aligns with my intentions. I'm interested to know if it works for the other councillors on the committee. If it works for all of us, let's just move forward and get to the selection process, which is really about figuring out who we're going to interview, which is where I think the real decision comes from.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Pelosa.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and a wonderful pick of order of speakers, as my question is to Councillor Van Holst, recognizing there's a very well-experienced and diverse group of applicants. Is there anything in particular the London Hydro Board's looking at to fill as a skill set, whether it be legal, finance, previous operating experience, and engineer? Just looking for insight from the board.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, and I do believe that they submitted comments. Is that correct? And if that's the case, perhaps the clerk could read those. If not, I might be able to make a comment.
So there were comments submitted at a previous meeting by the Hydro Board on what skill sets they were looking for. And the clerk doesn't have it immediately at hand, but can pull it up.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I can say, Madam Chair, while the clerk's attempting to pull that up, my recollection is that the board is looking for a number of skill sets. Legal is certainly one, engineering, and most important was the business acumen of someone in maybe a C-level suite. That someone with a great deal of experience in business was requested.
Okay, we have the comments from London Hydro Board.
Thank you, through the chair. The submission to the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee read as follows from the London Hydro Board. In consideration of Marilyn's replacement and based on the current board's skill set, the board would definitely benefit greatly from a seasoned senior executive with broad corporate, financial, and regulatory/legal experience.
Thank you for that. And anything further, Councillor Pelosa anymore? No, okay. And Councillor Van Hulst, did you want to make any further comments? Because you were on my list, and you were, for this point, you were addressing Councillor Pelosa's questions.
No, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to move forward with a selection process.
Okay, so first we're going to vote on this motion. The motion is that we select 3 candidates to be interviewed, and I will call the question for that motion.
I vote in favor, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 6-0.
So the next vote will be all of the list of names, and we can each select up to 3 who we would like to see interviewed. So that is eScribe, and you can pick 3.
Thank you. Through the chair, the selection process has indicated the candidates Tanya Goodine, Margaret Parks, and Stephen Stefanko for interviewing.
So we'll have that motion will come up in 1 second. So I will need a mover and a seconder to put those 3 names forward, moved by Councillor Van Hulst and seconded by the Deputy Mayor, and I will call the question. Oh, hold on 1 second. We have, go ahead, Councillor Van Hulst.
Yes, a comment, if I may, Madam Chair, as one of thanks to all those who put their names forward, and also to mention that we have a new business coming forward to promote the the technologies that London Hydros has developed. You recall there we were creating a sister company, and that will need board members as well. So certainly some of the candidates here would be appropriate to sit on that board. So I wanted to provide that as something to consider for the future for those people.
Thank you, Councillor. That's a good point. And with that, I will call the question now.
Closing the vote, the motion's carried 6-0.
Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Yes, I wonder if now that we will proceed to interviews, if I certainly trust you as the chair to work with Ms. Livingston and the clerk's office to come up with some questions. I know it's difficult for us as a committee to kind of talk about the questions because we can't have a quorum. But if there are questions that are burning for committee members that we could submit into that process, I hope that there's an option to do that. But I generally trust the chair working with our staff to develop a good slate of base questions for the interview process. I just wonder if I can confirm that would be the process.
I'll let the clerk comment.
Thank you. And through the chair, I just wanted to add to the conversation that we have already reached out to London Hydro, and they have provided us with some feedback about potential questions.
Great, thank you.
Excellent, good. Okay, we will move along in the agenda to 4.2. It's an application for an issuance of a proclamation, Bullying Elimination Week. Do I move or a second or comments? Councillor Van Holst.
I'm happy to move that item, Madam Chair. And there's an additional proclamation here. I would be happy to move both of those if there's a seconder.
Okay, so we'll move those both together, and I'll look for a seconder. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Thank you. Any comments or questions about those things? Seeing none, I will call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 6-0.
Deferred matters. I look to committee if there is additional business that I'm not aware of, and I see none. So I will go look for a motion to go in camera. We have 4 items on the confidential agenda. The reasons for our going into confidential session are explained on the public agenda. They are all to do with 3 with land acquisition and 1 with land disposition. So I'll look for a motion to go in camera, moved by Councillor Pelosa, seconded by Councillor Van Holst, and I'll call the question on that.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 6-0.
So we'll just take a couple of seconds to get everything for the confidential session.